Ephesians 5:6-14. Let no one deceive you with empty words, for because of these things, the wrath of God comes upon the sons of disobedience. Therefore, do not become partners with them. For at one time you were darkness, but now you are light in the world. Walk as children of light, for the fruit of the light is found in all that is good and right and true. And try to discern what is pleasing to the Lord. Take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them. For it is shameful even to speak of the things that they do in secret. But when anything is exposed by the light, it becomes visible. For anything that becomes visible is light. Therefore, it says, awake, O sleeper, and arise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you.
Good morning. Leave that Bible open to Ephesians 5, and this lesson this morning is just a continuation of our lesson last Sunday morning. So I'll try and give you a real quick overview of where we were last Sunday. We did chapter 5, Ephesians 5 and verses 1 through 5, and there were 6 things that we talked about, three things not to do, and 3 things not to say or to talk about. You can see them, I think, in verse 3. Sexual immorality, all impurity, or covetousness. That should probably be the word greed. Greed. Sexual immorality, impurity, anything that makes you not pure with God, or greediness must not be named among you. And then in verse 4, sorry about that, I think I got it all right here for you. This is the way we talked about what they were in verse 4. Ugly speech, that word is the opposite of beautiful. And so what's the opposite of beautiful? Ugly. So don't say ugly words. Don't do ugly speech. Foolish talk, that's moron speech. Morologia. Don't do foolish talk. And then the last one, I think, is this is the way that I'm going to treat it. I think the sense is don't be harsh in the way that you speak with people. And then we talked about why not, and we talked about what to do instead. Instead, give thanksgiving. And so, with that in mind, this is where we've got the flow. This is what we're talking about. And so, I think that this text just keeps on going. We stopped last week because I was at the end of my time. So now we're just picking up. It's the same basic thought. So verse 6 says, it looks like I have my verse wrong. That should be verse 6. That's up there right now. Sorry about that. Verse 6 says, let no one deceive you with empty words. For because of these things, the wrath of God comes upon the sons of disobedience. You can read that if you want. I'm not going to take the time to read it right now. But this is what I would like for you to hear before we get started. Did I do this? I think what I wanted to do, and I don't remember. Yes, it's the title of this lesson. I made it the title of this lesson. Don't just think about it in terms of a title, though. What I would like for you to do in this lesson is like write a sticky note that says, let no one deceive you, and stick it to your forehead so that as we talk about every single thing in this lesson, it's all under the umbrella of don't be deceived. And I think that if you do that kind of has been the key that helped unlock understanding in this text for me, was to just remember to keep that don't be deceived at the front of your mind. And it's something, in my Bible, I don't even have to turn the page. If I go back to chapter 4, in verse 17, it was no longer walk as the Gentiles do. And then there's this list in the futility of their minds, darken their understanding, in their ignorance. We talked about all of that stuff. But in verse 22, the very last thing on that list is put off your old self, which belongs to your former manner of life and is corrupt through deceitful desires. And this is the thing that I want you to remember, that I want us to think about as we run through this text, is that God is the speaker, Paul, God speaking through Paul, is saying to us, I think he's saying these words because people are deceived by these things. And so he's reminding us and he's telling us, listen, don't be deceived by this. Don't be fooled. Don't be tricked. And the thing not to be fooled about in chapter 5 and verse 7 is that these things that we have been talking about, they are not okay with God in any way. So he says there in verse 6, he says, because of these things, the wrath of God comes upon the sons of disobedience. So just pause for 1 second before we get started and think about what deception might look like. This text, I said I wasn't going to read it, but this text gives us a couple options. Probably refers to both unbelievers and believers who falsely think worldly living is of no consequence. That's the main thing here that I think of. If I'm going to live like the world, and what we've been talking about earlier in 1 through 5, if I'm going to live like the world, or if I'm going to talk like the world, how many people do you know, or how many times have you deceived yourself to think it's probably not that big of a deal? I mean, maybe it is a big deal, and maybe I should stop, but it's probably speaking too hard of these things to talk about it in terms of like your eternal destination. Talk about it in terms of a salvation issue. Or let me just not beat around the bush and how I talk about this stuff. These things that we're talking about, the 6 things that we listed on the board up there, some of those things we could probably look at and we would be like, yeah, some of those are probably a salvation issue. But, ugly talking, are you going to go to hell because of ugly talking? It would be easy to walk down that road, wouldn't it? I mean, it would be easy to kind of think those thoughts and put that kind of stuff in our head. But the text starts, this section starts by saying to us straight from the gate in verse 6, don't be deceived. And he just is going to lay it out there right now. Because of these things, the wrath of God comes upon the sons of disobedience. So whatever you need to do to be honest with yourself and honest with other people about what's okay with God and what's not okay with God, we're going to be governed by the reminder here at the start to not be deceived about these things. Okay, so there's 3 things. It's not like you say, don't be deceived about these 3 things. But I think you can break this text down in 3 different ways. So let's read the first one, verses 7 through 10. Don't be deceived, verses 7 through 10. Therefore, do not become partners with them, for at one time you were darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Walk as children of light. For the fruit of light is found in all that is good and right and true, and try to discern what is pleasing to the Lord. Okay, so number 1, don't be deceived about the sons of disobedience. Number 1, in verse 7, don't become partners with them. And this might help. This was helpful for me to look at what this is not nice or respectful for me to do it this way, but so in my Bible software, I've got a thing where you compare the text, and so I got this filter, and I say, I want to see all of my English versions. And I think there's 24 of them that pop up. But then with those English versions, I have them sorted according to ones that are good. And then like halfway down, I start to call these the goofy Bibles. Maybe there's a better way to call it than goofy Bibles, but that's what the bottom section is, the goofy Bibles. But I have the goofy Bibles on my list because they're still useful to see how other people have said, what's going on with this text? What does it mean? So what does this mean? Do not become partners with them. Okay, the Message, Goofy Bible number 1. This is the king of all the goofy Bibles, the Message. Don't even hang around with people like that. And maybe that's not what the Greek text says, but it's pretty good. It carries the meaning pretty well in a way that we would understand very clearly what God is saying. Don't become partners with the sons of disobedience. Don't be deceived. Don't be partners with them. Don't even hang around with people like that. The New Century Version, have nothing to do with them. The New Living Translation, don't participate in the things these people do. I don't think so. I'll show you why on that one. The New Revised Standard Version, that's on the top of the list. That's not a goofy Bible. The New Revised Standard Version, do not be associated with them, is the thing that we're talking about here on this list. And, okay, so don't be deceived about the eternal destiny of the sons of disobedience. Number 1, don't even hang out with them. Don't be partners with them in what they're doing, the sons of disobedience. Now, I don't know if this happens for you, but immediately what happens to me is I'm organizing the text, I'm writing it down in my notes, and I'll tell you what runs through my head right now. Now I have a tension. And I'll put it up here, what that tension is. Look at Matthew chapter 9. I'll show you the tension that I think is a legitimate one. Like, this is not an easy thing to wrestle with. This is, for every single person in this room who's a Christian, it's like a tightrope. And we got to find some way to balance and do what Jesus said, but it's not easy to balance on this tightrope, because on either side, there's issues that cause attention. So issue number one is Matthew chapter 9 and verses, I guess I would start in verse 9. As Jesus passed on from there, he saw a man called Matthew sitting at the tax booth. And he said to him, "Follow him." And he rose and followed him. And Jesus reclined at table in the house. Behold, many tax collectors and sinners came and were reclining with Jesus and his disciples. And when the Pharisees saw it, they said to his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" But when he heard it, he said, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice, for I came not to call the righteous, but sinners." Okay, so if we're going to take the Message version of that, which says, don't even hang around people like that, well, Jesus did, right? I mean, you see, I've got a tension. I've got the text that tells me what to do and how I'm supposed to do it, but then I've got Jesus did this, and we are called to be his disciples, and our function in the world is to go out and to rescue people from the darkness and bring them into the light. And that doesn't happen by beating them over the head with the stick of the gospel. It happens by forming relationships and loving people. The end part of what Jesus said in this text is, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, to be merciful and gracious and loving to people. Okay, so that's one side of the tightrope. But now go over to John chapter 17. I think John 17 might be one of the things that, how about this? I haven't thought this all the way through yet, so be patient with me on this. But the conversation that we're talking about right now is the tightrope. Don't be partners with them. Matthew 9, go and save them from the world. Maybe John 17 is the bar that we hold that helps keep our balance. I'm not sure if that works or not. John 17, look at verses 14 through 18. This is what Jesus said to his disciples. I've given them your word, and the world has hated them because they are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. I do not ask you to take them out of the world, but that you keep them from the evil one. They are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. Sanctify them in the truth. That word sanctify is important for this text. The word sanctify is just a variation of the word holy, which means to set apart. So sanctify them in the truth is, here's my people, set them apart from the world in truth. So there is a removedness that we're supposed to be from the world. We're not completely integrated with them. Anyway, you keep reading through these texts. 2 Corinthians 6 is another good passage that helps us with this passage. But, we're all going to have to wrestle with this tension and what it means and how it's going to look in our lives. But you can't neglect what the text says. Don't be deceived. The sons of disobedience are looking at the wrath of God. That's the way that it is. And so number one in this text, do not become partners with them. We still love them. We still strive to rescue them from being the sons of disobedience. But there is a huge difference. I don't know exactly where the line is, but there is a huge difference in being merciful and loving somebody and trying to rescue their soul from the devil and hitching my horse to their wagon. Those are different, right? Don't be partners with them is the thing that we're reading about. And then you come down to verse 8 and you have a reason. I got to get back to my text. Be patient with me here. Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 8, you have the reason for this. Why? For at one time you were darkness, but now you are the light in the Lord. Walk as children of light. Why do we not be partners with them? Because even though you used to be that darkness, if you're a Christian, you're not that darkness anymore. You're light. And so the command is to walk as children of light. How do I know if I'm walking as a child of light? Keep on reading. In verse 9, it says, for the fruit of light. That's kind of Bible language I get bogged down in Bible language sometimes. What does that mean? The fruit of light. That's not how I talk. Just think about it like this. What does light produce? What is the fruit of light? In verse 9, the fruit of light is found in all that is good and right and true. So don't become partners with the sons of disobedience, because you used to be darkness, but now you're light. Walk as children of light. And if you are walking as a child of light, you should be producing everything that is good and right and true in your life, and not doing the other side of the line there. And so this is the command. Command number 1. This all falls under this whole thing. Don't become partners with them. And this is what you would do in verse 10. Verse 10 is, try to discern what is pleasing to the Lord. These are our marching orders. God's Word, which is another. God's Word is the competing rival for the king of goofy Bibles. The Message and God's Word are in competition with one another. But this is what God's Word says on this, and it's useful to see what's happening here. Determine which things please the Lord. Am I going to be on the darkness side and partners with darkness and associating with darkness? Or am I going to be on the light side and not partners with darkness, but producing the fruit of light, everything that is good and true and right? And then you step back, and the command is, you decide which one is right and pleasing to the Lord. Discern, use your brain, and obviously being on this side of the line is what God wants. So number 1, this is my summary of everything that we talked about. Number 1, don't be deceived. Don't be partners with the sons of disobedience. Why? Because they're darkness. You're supposed to be children of light. The light is all about what is good and true and right. Make sure to attach yourself to those things and not their opposites. That's number one. Number two, verse 11 through 13. It almost says the same thing, but there's a little bit of a difference here. Verses 11 through 13. Take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them. For it is shameful even to speak of the things that they do in secret. But when anything is exposed by the light, it becomes visible. Okay, so look at the difference between verse 7, do not become partners with them, and verse 11, take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness. And you say, how are those different? Or are they different? I think they are just a little bit different. And the difference would be something like this. The first one is, don't attach yourself to the sons of disobedience. Don't be partners with them. Don't attach yourself to them. And the second one is, and definitely don't do what they do. Right? It's not just being attached to them, it's doing. That's what verse 11 says. Take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness. So don't be attached to them, and definitely don't do the things that they do. That word participate there, I guess it says in my ESV, it says, take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness. That word, take no part in, is found 3 times in the New Testament. And one of the 3 is my very favorite. It's from Revelation 18. I don't remember the verse. Maybe verse 8. Revelation 18 and verse 8, where it's talking about Babylon, the kingdoms of man, who's called the prostitute here in Revelation 18. And it says, this is our command in Revelation 18 in regards to the kingdoms of man. It says, come out of her, my people, lest you participate in her sin, lest you take part in her punishment. And so this one is, don't participate with the sons of disobedience. Don't be involved in darkness and sin with them. Why? Because if you are, then you're also going to be involved in the wrath of God that's coming upon them. Like, we don't want that, is the second part. And so that's what we're talking about here. But in all of this, I just want to keep coming back to the overall theme. Don't be deceived. I don't know if this is you, but almost every person that I can imagine having this conversation with, every person would have the mindset of something like, well, that's probably true for some people. Some people would get swept away with all of that, but not me. This is not going to affect me. I'm not the one who's going to be swept away into the wrath of God with the sons of disobedience just because I'm partners with them, just because I'm connected with them. And the idea is, no, don't be deceived. So we don't do what they do. Instead, we expose them. That's what the light does to the darkness. It exposes it. So let's do this with exposing. I think I can summarize the first one. Let's go to 1 Timothy 5. What does it mean to expose the darkness or the sons of disobedience? There are 2 senses, and they're kind of related, but I think you can separate them. We should separate them, but there's 2 senses of what it means to expose these things. What are we supposed to be doing as children of light in regards to exposing the darkness? Number 1 is just telling. Just saying, hey, that's darkness. That's not good. That's not right. That's not what we're supposed to be doing. And so Matthew 18 is an example of that. If your brother sins, or if your brother sins against you, the text says, go and tell him between you and him privately. That word telling him is the same word as exposing. So you've done something wrong. I'm going to tell you, hey, you've sinned. I'm just letting you know. Like I'm just telling. It's information. Exposing is, this is not okay. Then what you do is you turn the volume up on that just a little bit, and you get to the word rebuke. And I think that you can see that a couple times. They're close. We can read these because they're close together, and we can flip through really fast. 1 Timothy chapter 5 and verse 20. As for those who persist in sin, rebuke them. That's our same word, expose. Rebuke them in the presence of all, so that the rest may stand in fear. So you would take the idea of telling somebody about, hey, this is not good, this is not something that's acceptable to God. You turn the volume up on that a little bit and you turn it into rebuke, and it is, you should not be doing this. That's what rebuking is. It's not okay, and you need to stop. And so let's look at this since it's close. Titus chapter 1 and verse 9. We can flip through and see the word rebuke or expose a couple different times. Chapter 1 and verse 9. He must hold firm to the trustworthy word as taught, so that he may be able to give instruction in sound doctrine, and so also to rebuke those who contradict it. Verse 13, the testimony is true, therefore rebuke them sharply, that they may be of sound faith. In chapter 2 and verse 15, declare these things, exhort and rebuke with all authority, let no one disregard you. And so that concept of telling somebody about darkness and sin and going a little bit farther and saying, you should not be doing that. And if you are, you need to stop. That's what we're supposed to be doing. Now I know immediately, believe me, firsthand, I know immediately what's going to happen when you do that most of the time. Like, that's not going to go well. Especially in our world today. People do not like to be told that what they're doing is wrong and darkness, and that they should not be doing it, and that they need to stop. People don't like to be told that. But read this text again with me and hear what Paul is talking about. Don't be deceived. The sons of disobedience have a future of wrath. In verse 11, take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them. And if you keep on moving through this text about exposing them in verse 13 and 14, you can see why, the why behind all of this. When anything is exposed by light, it becomes visible. For anything that becomes visible is light. And so, I'm not telling you that the most effective way to do this thing that I'm talking about right now is to write about sin on Facebook. But I'm also telling you that it wouldn't be wrong to do that. I mean, you're going to get not very good results just by throwing something out there to the wall. You know, that's not how relationships work. That's not the way that it goes. But just to say in a public way, this is sin, and it's not okay. And God's people should not be participating in it. And if you are participating in it, you need to stop, because it's darkness and sinful and wrong. Just to say those things is not wrong. It's not wrong. Again, I'm going to tell you, there's two parts of this conversation. You know, pick your battles and try and win, and that's not going to get the job done. But also, I just want to contrast that with the idea that this world is living in, that it's wrong to tell somebody something that is bad and they shouldn't be doing it. No, that's not true. And in fact, as God's people of light, our job is to expose that and say, that's sinful and you shouldn't be doing it. So take that for whatever you will. I think that the same thing is true, though. At least 2 points. Don't be deceived. Don't be partners with them. Don't take part in their unfruitful works of darkness. And then number 3 is verse 14. Verse 14 says, therefore it says. And then in most of our Bibles, it's going to be set apart in a poetic section. And the question that we're all going to have to ask is, therefore it says, and here's the thing that it says. And so the question would be, what is it? Where does it say this? If you have a Bible with references, it might point you to Isaiah 61. I don't remember what all the options are. There's a ton of different options. And this happens sometimes. You go back and you read the Old Testament passage and you're like, that's not what it says at all. And so the thing that happens here in 5:14 is it's set apart like an Old Testament quote, but there's no good option for where the Old Testament quote is coming from. And so what most commentators are going to say is that verse 14 this is a possibility. It's like an ancient hymn, or it's a line from a song that people used to sing that everybody was familiar with, maybe influenced by the Old Testament, but it's not an Old Testament quote. And so here is that, if it is an ancient psalm, this is what it says. Awake, O sleeper, and arise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you. So a couple things that we might say about that. You can imagine how that would be a song about resurrection. Awake, O sleeper, and arise from the dead. Like, we could sing a song about that, about resurrection. Some people say that it's a song about baptism. It's what baptism is. You're dead, you're buried, and then awake, O sleeper, and arise from the dead. And it would be called a baptismal hymn. Nobody knows. It's just different options. But regardless of what it is or where it comes from, what is the message? And this falls into the bigger conversation that we've been having about don't be deceived. The first part says, awake, O sleeper. That's this. Wake up. Wake up. Like, if your eyes are closed and if you're walking around thinking that everything's fine, the sons of disobedience, it's not really that big of a deal, that I'm connected with them and partners with them and sometimes doing the things that they do. It's not that big of a deal. You've been deceived, and the admonition is, wake up. That's something else that Paul does in 1 Thessalonians. He talks about, we're not of the darkness, we're of the daytime. Wake up. Wake up and arise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you. See how that connects to the things that we've been talking about. We are to be children of light, and we're supposed to reflect God's light to the world. Let this little light of mine shine. And so shine God's light to the world. And when we're not darkness and we shine God's light, the end result is, and Christ will shine on you. That's how the flow operates here. And so this would be the end of this major section. Let's read it again and think about all of the different tensions and try to wrestle through those and think about what it means for my life. Verse 6. Let no one deceive you with empty words, for because of these things the wrath of God comes upon the sons of disobedience. Therefore, do not be partners with them. For at one time you were darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Walk as children of light, for the fruit of light is found in all that is good and right and true. Try to discern what is pleasing to the Lord. Take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them. For it is shameful even to speak of the things that they do in secret. But when anything is exposed by the light, it becomes visible. For anything that becomes visible is light. Therefore it says, awake, O sleeper, and arise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you. I thought this little quote was helpful, and I'll end with this. Exposing such things not only reveals unfruitful works, but teaches believers two important lessons. First, it reveals the ugliness of the deeds that are done in secret. Second, it impresses on them the importance of producing the fruit of light, the works of goodness, righteousness, and truth. Deeds of darkness cannot be allowed, therefore, to spread and encompass the community of believers. So if you take one takeaway from this, I try and do that with each one of the lessons. Like, okay, that's a lot. What's the one thing that we're supposed to do? I'm going to combine it into two. Don't participate with the sons of disobedience. Instead, our job is to expose them. No matter how much the world tells you that's mean and hateful and we shouldn't do it, it's right there in the Bible. That's our job, to expose the works of darkness. If you're here this morning and you're not a Christian, part of what becoming a Christian is I think evident in what we're talking about. Your life, not as a Christian, is walking and living in darkness. And when you decide to become a follower of Jesus Christ, what that means is you're coming out of the darkness and into the light. Now, here's the thing. Your sin is going to be exposed. You're going to have to say to God, I'm a sinner, and because of my sin, I am separated from you, and I'm sorry for that. And that's a painful process. We did that with Psalm 32 last Sunday night. It's a painful process. But coming out of the darkness into the light to expose my sin and tell God that I'm sorry for it, and to die to myself and say, I'm going to bury that old dead man and not do that anymore to the very best of my ability, so that when I come up out of that grave, I'm going to walk as a son of light, not a son of disobedience. That's what Christianity is.